One of the ways that Paul preaches the gospel, one of my favorites, when he says, we preach Christ and Christ crucified. Now, why would he have to say that? Because whether you were a Jewish or a Gentile, they were looking at these Christians getting up in the morning, watching the sun come up and singing hymns of praise to what they saw as a dead criminal. And they said, these Christians are nuts. Why would you trade the beauty and the majesty and the pomp and circumstance of Olympus and all of its gods for this? You're nuts. And Paul says, yes, that is exactly what we're doing. We preach Christ and Christ crucified. And he goes on to say it's a stumbling block to Jewish theology. Why? Because God remains utterly inviolable, utterly transcendent. And that's part, frankly, of the beauty and the nobility of Judaism. Its utter insistence on God's radical transcendence. But then Paul says, but there's more to God than that. And then he goes on to say, and it is foolishness to the Gentiles, by which he meant to the Greek philosophers, with their Platonic thought of, again, a God who is inviolable, unreachable, unable to suffer or get hungry or angry or to cry or to die, frankly. And Paul says this is exactly who God is. Right? We are so confronted by the notion of impotence on the cross that it becomes a scandal to the idea of a God who is all-powerful. But that is exactly what he says. It is precisely in the great silence of the eternal word on the cross that God is victorious. Not in imperial power, not in the legions backed by the Zeuses and the goddesses of war, but by this humble rabbi. There's the power of God, right? The power to enter into the suffering of human history, to enter into our dismay and our despair. To not just empty the divine self into the flesh, but to empty the human self into death itself. Right? And in entering into both human life and into our death, there is nowhere that God is not. Right? Only a God of love can refuse to remain transcendent. It's like having a long-distance love affair. It doesn't work ultimately. God says, this isn't good enough. We need to be together, right? I need to enter into the... So the Zimsum of creation is always and everywhere meant for the consummation of redemption. Creation and redemption are not two opposing moments. Redemption is the very fulfillment of creation. It is its purpose. It is its purpose that all things should be redeemed. One of my favorite lines from Colossians, Christ is all and is in all. Sit with that for a while. Christ is all and in all. Christ is what Christians name the very power, the very love, the very energy that, as we say, makes the galaxies go spiraling in their course. That holds all things. A beautiful line from the Colossians hymn, he holds all things in existence, synestican, to literally be like a web of energy that's sustaining us in every moment. So it's important that we understand that while our myths can still speak to the spiritual realities that they continue to sort of address, we can see these nevertheless even in richer ways, knowing what we know about the big book of creation, as it were. That in fact, the beauty of what we're learning is that in an evolutionary universe, God is always being born. There is never a moment that God is not being born. Meister Eckhart says, what does God do all day for all eternity? Lays on a maternity bed and gives birth. This is a beautiful idea. For those of you who know D.H. Lawrence, I'd like you to look with me at page 81, because he, again, sometimes poetry can say things that that doctrine can't, or says it in a way that cuts through doctrine itself. the bottom of page 81 is this beautiful, beautiful poem. The history of the cosmos is the history of the struggle of becoming. When the dim flux of unformed life struggled, convulsed back and forth upon itself, and broke at last into light and dark, came into existence as light, came into existence as cold shadow, then every atom of the cosmos trembled with delight. Behold, God is born. He is bright light. He is pitch dark and cold. And in the struggle of intangible chaos, when at a certain point a drop of water began to drip downwards and a breath of vapor began to wreathe up, lo, again, the shudder of bliss through all the atoms. Oh, God is born. Behold, he is born wet. Look, he hath movement upward. He spirals. And so, in the great eons of accomplishment and debacle, from time to time, the wild crying from every electron, lo, God is born. When sapphires cooled out of molten chaos, see, God is born. He is blue. He is deep blue. He is forever blue. When gold lay shining, threading the cooled-off rock, God is born. God is born, bright yellow and ductile. He is born. And when the little eggy amoeba emerged out of foam and of nowhere, then all the electrons held their breath. Ach, now indeed God is born. And he twinkles within. And when from a world of mosses and of ferns at last the narcissus lifted its 5-pointed stars and dangled them in the atmosphere, then every molecule of creation jumped and clapped its hands. God is born. God is born, perfumed and dangling and with a little cup. And throughout the eons, as the lizard swirls his tail finer than water, as the peacock turns to the sun and could not be more splendid, as the leopard smites the small calf with a spangled paw, perfect, the universe trembles. God is born. God is here. And when at last man stood on 2 legs and wondered, then there was a hush of suspense at the core of every electron. Behold, now very God is born. God himself is born. And so we see God is not until he is born. And also we see there is no end to the birth of God. It's lovely. A beautiful poem. The whole of creation tends inevitably toward redemption. This is the key. So the Incarnation is not so much a divine contingency plan because Adam and Eve screwed up. It is where creation has always been intended. The word we use for this in Christianity is panentheism. Some of you may have heard this term. It is distinguishable from pantheism in a key and important way for Christian theology. Pantheism literally means God is all. God is everything. Pan is the Greek for everything, pas upon, the way you decline this. So pan means everything, and of course theism refers to God. And this actually is problematic for Christian theology, pantheism. And the reason is because I think fundamentally, while it establishes the idea of God's closeness, everything is God, is essentially what it's saying. The problem with it is that it makes the relationship of God with everything mechanical. It is what it is. Everything is God. It's just God. Whereas the notion that Christianity has gravitated to in panentheism, that is to say God, not God is all things, but God in all things, the world being pregnant with the presence of God, as it were, the value and the beauty of panentheism is to understand that the union wrought between God and creation is not mechanical. It isn't just is, but is born of divine freedom, divine love. It is, in other words, a union wrought by God's choice to pour the divine self back into that created order that he had withdrawn from, as it were, in order to fulfill creation itself, to consummate, as it were, the relationship in the flesh. We call this incarnation. You understand? This is a beautiful idea. So panentheism is all about the divine initiative to love God's self back into the world. Not just to be with us or among us, but as Rohr says, as us. Transforming us into the divine. And so we learned then that in the history of the cosmos, the history of becoming, as D.H. Lawrence says, is the history of God birthing every moment into existence. So we have to then address the idea that in this world of God's beloved, as we are, there are these deep crises we face, both within ourselves, the wars we fight within our own heart, as it were, and we'll be addressing what those look like in our next session, but also how those interior conflicts, self-alienation, get reflected back out into the world and become conflicts between people and tribes and nations, as it were. And how do we understand this relationship then between darkness, as it were, and the beauty that the gospel holds out? In one of our sessions where I look at chapter 4, I'm going to be addressing just that point of what we call asceticism, those practices, right, that are traditionally known as fasting and these types of things, that I will try to help you understand as not practices that are meant to be body-hating by any stretch of the imagination, but are really the reclamation of beauty. And that is what I think the Christian life is about, the reclamation of beauty, of holding light in a world of darkness, right? A compelling beauty that the world is so desperately in need of. And I would like to read a couple of things that help to spell that out, and you'll pardon my jumping around here. If you look with me at page 39, while there can be no naive denial of the human capacity for hatred, injustice, and violence, Christianity insists that these have neither the first nor the last word in a cosmos that God has deemed good and beautiful. And don't forget that language from Genesis. God saw that it was good. Never let anyone tell you that original sin refers to something original in us. By original, it means the first, but not endemic, not central to who we are. We are first and foremost good. Sin, as it were, that oppressive power that seems to tie our hands, that makes me want to grab a bottle of Flintstones when I'm told otherwise, that possessive, that power that we are all sort of burdened by, to lash out, right? To be in a world in which it takes 9 months to gestate a human life and 1 bullet to destroy it. Where it takes multiple years to build the Twin Towers and 2.5 hours to level them. Where you could have friendships that last 30 and 40 years until one argument severs it forever. We live in a world in which it's so hard to bring life. It's so hard to do the life-giving thing, to support and to sustain and to nurture reconciliation and love, and so easy to screw it up, right? This is essentially what we're up against, that struggle. Yeah? And we can't deny it in our lives. We've all been there. We've all experienced that. But this is precisely our task, our mission, our vocation, as we'll talk later, as contemplatives, to be that light, to be that hope, that life has an edge over death. Sometimes not much of an edge, but an edge. That love has an edge over hatred, and light over darkness, and kindness over cruelty. And it's our vocation to embody that very reality in the world. You know, that beautiful saying that's so common, it's commonly attributed, I think wrongly, but it doesn't matter, to St. Francis, to preach the gospel always and everywhere, and when you're forced, use words. That this idea of embodying that light is what matters. And the practice of our prayer is what gives us the capacity to do that. Because we have to untangle ourselves from all our own muck. John of the Cross has a beautiful image that we're all like windows that are smudgy. And the more smudgy the window, the more you see the window itself. And the life of virtue is the gentle, patient Windexing until the light of the window itself is so clear that you don't see the window anymore. You just see the light of Christ shining through it. This is what the practice of virtue means. Meister Eckhart is also attributed to have said spirituality is more about subtraction than addition. It's not about doing one more practice or one more rosary or one more fast or one more anything. It's about removing the obstacles that prevent us from loving. This is why our meditation is a kind of death, a memento mori, to use the old Latin tradition, the remembrance of death. It is the practicing of dying to my goals, my agendas, my thoughts, my judgments, so that I can be fully present. You see? So we'll talk more about putting all of this theology into those practices a bit later. You'll see where I'm trying to go with providing you a theological and scriptural basis for the practice itself to frame that in a way. But that's what we're after here, beauty. And not, as I say here, the commodified beauty that the world wants us to think of, but the kind of beauty that the world, as Jesus says, the kind of peace that the world cannot give.